Welcome to the channel Not Scared But, the perfect place for you to test the level of your fear. Follow these stories, and at the end, tell me what you thought, leaving your evaluation in the comments from 0 to 10. I always thought that living in a house far from the city had its advantages. It was quieter, without the constant noise of cars and people talking loudly in the streets. Just the sound of birds singing in the morning and the wind rustling through the trees. But after what happened a few weeks ago, I'm not so sure I like the silence anymore. It was a Wednesday, around 9 at night. That day, the weather was terrible. It was raining non-stop, accompanied by several thunderstorms. I was at home, alone. My wife had gone to spend a few days at her sister's house because their mother was sick, and I decided to stay home and take care of our dog, Max. Max is a big dog, the kind that looks intimidating because of his size, but in reality, he's a sweetheart. He always stays nearby, lying close to the sofa, keeping me company. That night I was watching television, not really paying much attention to the program, just waiting for sleep to come. Out of nowhere, I noticed that Max was restless, getting up and heading towards the front door. I found it strange because he rarely gets up like that, especially at that hour. I followed him and opened the door a little to see what was outside. The street was dark, lit only by a street light a bit far away. There was nothing there, just the wind making the leaves of the trees sway. Max kept staring at the gate, growling softly. I couldn't see anything, but I felt a shiver run down my spine. I closed the door and tried to convince myself that it was just his imagination, or maybe a cat that had passed by. I went back to the sofa, but I couldn't concentrate on what I was watching anymore. Max was still restless, pacing back and forth, and I started to get a little worried. I decided to look through the living room windows just to be sure. I pulled the curtain back and peeked outside. Again, nothing. The garden was dark, the street silent. But when I returned to the sofa, I heard a low noise, a sound that came from outside, like someone trying to open the gate. My heart started racing. I stood still for a few seconds, trying to listen more closely. Max began to bark, and I knew it wasn't his usual bark, like when he sees a cat or a bird. It was a more serious, deeper bark. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, shining it at the front door. I didn't know what to do, whether I should go out to check or stay inside and wait. The truth is, I was terrified. With the phone in my hand, I walked over to the window again, trying to get a better look. That's when I saw them. Two men dressed in dark clothes were standing at the gate. One of them was crouched down, fiddling with the lock, and the other was standing, looking at the house as if trying to find me. My heart nearly leaped out of my chest. I didn't know if they had seen me, but I knew I couldn't just stand there. I picked up the phone and called the police, trying to speak as quietly as possible. I explained the situation, gave them my address, and the operator told me to lock all the doors and windows and wait. I hung up and ran to lock the kitchen door, then headed upstairs, glancing out the living room window again. The two men were still there, and now one of them was pushing the gate. Max kept barking, which only added to the tension. The sound of the lock being forced made everything scarier, and I knew they were trying to get in by any means necessary. I didn't have a weapon at home. I never thought it would be necessary. But at that moment, I regretted not having bought something for protection. My only hope was that the police would arrive quickly, but I knew that since we lived so far away, it might take a while. I decided to make noise to scare them off, so I grabbed a wooden broom from the kitchen and started banging on the wall, shouting that the police were already on their way. For a moment, it seemed like it had worked. I heard them talking, one of them saying something like, "Let's go." My heart slowed down a bit, thinking they might give up. But, to my surprise, instead of leaving, they decided to climb over the gate. I was paralyzed for a moment, watching one of them throw a leg over the fence. When he began to jump down, I knew I had to do something. Anything. I ran upstairs and grabbed a heavy lamp from the guest room. I returned to the stairs and waited there. My plan, if I even had one, was to hit whoever came through the front door. The wait felt endless. Max was now beside me, but not barking, just growling low. I heard the sound of heavy footsteps on the lawn, Their breathing seemed audible, even with the wind outside. And then I heard the sound of the doorknob turning. They had managed to open the front door. My whole body trembled. I stood still, holding the lamp with all the strength I had. The door opened slowly, and I saw one of their shadows entering the living room. He looked around, trying to see in the dark. I knew I had only one chance, and when he took another step, I threw the lamp with all my might. It hit him right on the shoulder, and he yelled in pain, stumbling backward. But that only made him angrier. He shouted to the other guy, who was right behind him, and started running toward me. I knew I couldn't stay there, so I ran to the bedroom, locking the door behind me. My heart was beating so fast it felt like it was going to explode. Max was by my side, growling and ready to attack. I heard heavy footsteps coming up the stairs, and at that moment, I began to wonder if I would make it out of this alive. That's when I heard the sound of sirens. The red and blue lights illuminated the room through the window. The burglars heard it too, and I could feel their hesitation on the other side of the door. A second later, I heard them running down the stairs, the front door slamming shut, and then silence. I stayed there, locked in the bedroom for a few minutes until I heard the police calling from outside. They were there, and I was safe. I opened the door and ran downstairs, still shaking with fear but relieved. Max ran to their side, still agitated, but I knew everything was fine now. The police told me they had caught one of the men trying to climb back over the gate, but the other had escaped. After that night, I was never able to sleep peacefully in that house again. Sometimes the silence can be scarier than any noise, and now, every time Max barks at the door, my heart races, hoping it's not another unwanted visitor. You know, I was never afraid of the dark or of storms, but that night made me reconsider. It was around 8 p.m. I was home alone when suddenly the lights started to flicker. And then out of nowhere, everything went completely dark. The rain had been pouring for some time, that heavy kind that makes a loud noise when hitting the roof tiles. I tried waiting a bit, thinking the power would come back soon, but nothing. A few minutes passed and I started to feel uneasy. I wasn't prepared for a blackout, you know? I didn't have candles, a flashlight, nothing. And to make things worse, I'm the type who gets lost even inside my own house in the dark. So I decided the best thing to do was to go out and head to the nearest supermarket to buy a flashlight. I lived on a very quiet street, the kind where everyone knows each other by name, but at that moment it seemed like there was no one around. The rain was so heavy that I couldn't see more than a few meters ahead. Even so, I grabbed my coat, put on my hood, and went out. I was a bit reluctant to go out in the rain, but I thought I had no choice. If I didn't go, I'd spend the whole night in the dark. As I walked, the cold, strong wind hit my face. There wasn't a soul around. The streetlights were all out because of the blackout, and all I could hear was the sound of the rain hitting hard against the ground. As I continued walking, that's when I saw a van. It was a big black van, the kind you see in police movies. It was parked there, on the other side of the street, with its hazard lights on. The van had all dark windows and I couldn't see anything inside. I found it strange because, let's be honest, who just sits in a van like that on a night like this? But you know how it is, right? I was worried about getting a flashlight and getting back home, so I didn't pay much attention. I kept walking, trying to ignore the cold that was already starting to take over me. I reached the supermarket, which luckily was open. It seemed like their generator was still working because there were a few dim lights on. I grabbed a simple handheld flashlight from the shelf and went to the checkout. There were 1 or 2 customers in the store, all with annoyed looks on their faces, probably irritated with the blackout situation, just like me. I paid quickly, grabbed my flashlight, and left as fast as I could. The rain didn't let up, and the wind seemed to get stronger by the minute. I started walking back, picking up the pace to get home quickly. On the way, I remembered the black van I'd seen earlier. I looked over to where it had been parked and nothing. The van was no longer there. I found it a bit odd, but again, I just wanted to get home as soon as possible. The cold was already bothering me, and the flashlight I had bought wasn't much help with all that rain hitting my face. It was when I got close to my house that the discomfort turned into something more. I stood there for a second, not believing what I was seeing. The black van was there, parked right in front of my house, now with its back doors wide open. I felt a chill down my spine. I didn't quite know what to think at the moment, but it was obvious that something was wrong. I took a few more steps, trying to understand what was happening, and that's when I saw it. 3 men dressed in dark clothes were loading my furniture into the van, as if they were moving. My furniture, my stuff, my couch, my armchair, the TV, everything being taken out of the house under that torrential rain. I felt my blood boil instantly. My first reaction was to shout, to tell them to stop, but something held me back. There were many of them, and I was alone. For a second I felt powerless, not knowing what to do. My heart was racing and all I could think was, what are these guys doing with my stuff? I decided to try to get a little closer, but without being noticed. I hid behind a tree, still holding the flashlight, and kept watching. They seemed very calm, like they knew exactly what they were doing. One of them, probably the leader, was giving orders to the others, pointing towards the inside of my house, while the other 2 kept loading the furniture into the van. It was as if they were certain that no one would bother them. I thought about running to ask for help, but at this point I already knew that all my neighbors were probably locked inside their homes because of the blackout and the storm. And to make things worse, the thieves were right there, in front of me. I crouched down a bit more, trying to stay hidden, and grabbed my phone. With trembling fingers, I dialed the police number. The call took a while to connect. When I finally managed to speak with the dispatcher, I tried to explain what was happening. I spoke quietly, almost whispering, afraid they would hear me. The dispatcher asked me to stay calm and move away from the area, that the police were on their way. But how could I stay calm? These guys were taking everything from my house. That was when I noticed that one of the men, the leader, looked directly in my direction. It was as if he knew I had been there the whole time. My heart raced even faster, and I felt my legs weaken. He signaled to the others, and 2 of them started walking towards me. That's when the real panic set in. I felt my stomach turn, and all I wanted to do was run away from there. But I knew I had to buy some time. I had to do something. Whatever I did, it needed to be quick. I just wanted the police to arrive soon. The wind grew stronger, the rain pounded down harder. And there I was, standing, trying to come up with a plan. They were getting closer, and I knew I had to act before it was too late. I knew I didn't have much time. The 2 men were approaching quickly, and their leader kept his eyes fixed on where I was hiding. The fear began to grip me in a way I had never felt before. My heart was racing, and my legs felt heavy, almost paralyzed, but I knew I had to move. I tried to back away slowly without making any noise, but I quickly realized that wouldn't work. The sound of their footsteps grew louder, and I knew that if I didn't do something fast, they would find me. I took a deep breath, trying to control the panic. I turned and started running. I ran like I had never run before, feeling the weight of the rain hitting hard against my face. My hood flew back, and I didn't even bother to adjust it. I was only thinking about getting away from them, about surviving. I heard footsteps running behind me, and my heart nearly jumped out of my chest. I pushed myself to run faster, dodging puddles and the slippery ground. I passed the corner of my street and dashed into a narrow alley, trying to buy some time. I knew the supermarket was nearby and maybe I could get help there, but I didn't know if I could make it in time. I felt the phone vibrate in my pocket, and for a second, I thought about stopping to answer. Maybe it was the police calling me back. But the sound of footsteps was still too close, and I couldn't take the risk. I kept running through the alley and finally emerged onto the main street. I looked around, trying to get my bearings. The rain made everything hard to see, and for a moment I felt lost. That's when I saw the lights of the supermarket in the distance. I took a deep breath and forced myself to keep going. I knew that if I could make it there, I might have a chance. When I finally reached the supermarket parking lot, I turned to look back. The men had stopped at the entrance of the alley. They seemed to be arguing about something, maybe deciding whether it was worth continuing to chase me. I knew I had to do something quickly. I entered the supermarket, panting, not caring about the curious looks from the few customers who were still there. I ran to the checkout and desperately asked the cashier to call the police, explaining again everything that had happened. The woman, visibly frightened, grabbed the phone and started dialing. I could feel the sweat mixed with rain running down my face, and my eyes kept darting to the entrance, expecting to see those men walk in at any moment. After a few minutes, I heard the sound of sirens. My heart leaped with relief. I saw the red and blue lights reflecting in the supermarket windows, and for the first time that night, I felt that maybe I was safe. The men at the entrance of the alley saw the police cars arriving and ran back to the van. They didn't have time to continue what they were doing. I went to the exit and saw the black van speed away, disappearing around the corner. The police officers got out of their cars, and I ran to them, trying to explain everything that had happened, still trembling with fear. They listened to my account, and I knew it would be difficult to find those guys. But at that moment, all that mattered was that I was alive. While I was talking to the officers, I saw some neighbors coming out of their houses, curious to know what had happened. The power was still out and the streets were dark, but for the first time that night I felt safe, surrounded by people I knew. What happened next? Well, that's a long story, but I never looked at a black van the same way again.